Okay, good afternoon. Can we start? Yeah, thank you very much. So it's really nice to see you here. I checked that this is actually the third installment of the alumni life that we have. And in the previous rounds, we were talking with people who were coming either from the international organizations or they were coming from government sector. So I think that today is a really good switch towards something completely new. Let me introduce you Vojtěch Bartoš, who is our alumni from 2016. Actually, we ended up in the same year, which is depressing because you are much younger. And he is working in academic sector, and he is working in academia since he finished, always in the foreign countries. So first in Germany, in Munich. And nowadays, as you can see, in Milan, Italy, from his style and his avoidance of warm clothing. He mostly works in the field, or he always works in the field of behavioral and development economics. And how he does it is through experiments, like field experiments, internet experiments, everything. His thesis was really nice to read. I actually looked at it. Yeah, and I think that also his topics that he's talking about are very interesting for us, and mainly what we probably looking at what kind of people is it here. What we would like to hear is how did you come up with an idea of doing what you are doing? What was the path? Maybe more about the path and your career life than about the results, even though the results are impressive. So, organizationally, this should be 45 minutes, and afterwards questions. But I think that Vojta would prefer if you just ask questions throughout. That would be better. And so, floor is yours, and we are really happy to have you here.
Right. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the kind invite, and thanks for having me, and thanks for showing up late afternoon, with all the snow outside. I was just telling kind of my kids that I'm coming to Prague, in Milan, there's just rain now, and here kind of everything covered in snow, so they envied me. But there we go. All right. So thanks, Evka, for the kind introduction. It's me. I don't know, so I took this slide kind of from a presentation that I was giving to my breadwinners. So I'm being funded by one organization, so they wanted to see what I'm actually doing. So I felt like I should kind of show them the side of me. Okay, so I graduated from CERGE-EI in 2016, but I thought that it might be actually nice for you guys to know also kind of the path kind of leading up to the PhD. Okay, so it's kind of nice. I went back, I don't typically do kind of notes, in my notebook, but I felt I should actually do that now. And I was kind of coming up with these memories and kind of what were, the milestones in the life. And I'm starting from 2008, okay? And in 2008, I was this undergrad in econ, and I was just visiting the University of Constance in Germany as my Erasmus. And essentially, back then, what I wanted to do, I wanted to end up in finance. I was studying lots of courses on finance, hardcore math, statistics, etc. And there came the financial crisis. The interesting thing about the University of Constance was that they were producing lots of people who were very successful in finance, in the main bank, in the main investment banks, etc. These guys kept coming back, and not just to our classes, so that some of them were actually visiting us, but they were also giving kind of these keynote lectures where they were doing kind of this excuse, why everything kind of failed in 2008, the large financial crisis, right? And pretty much at that time, I realized I don't want to do that. I completely forgot about finance, and there was actually an interesting coincidence that I was taking a course that was called Ökonomie des Sozialstaats, so economics of a social state, which was dealing with topics of inequality, which was also introducing to me something like causal inference, which was also introducing something like experiments. Very basic stuff of that. Okay. Then I come back, and I was just finishing my undergrad, finished my thesis, and went to a master's back at IES, so across the street, the econ program at the Charles University, right? And there was this coincidence that at the same time, there started this collaboration with CERGE-EI of the program on economic theories. Okay, so I was like, okay, CERGE-EI, that sounds interesting. I go there to the library. They have good books. Why wouldn't I try the first year? First year somehow passed, and in that year, I had a chance to take courses by Andreas Ortmann back then, who was teaching micro. Now he's in Australia, but a frequent visitor to here. I'll recommend it for you guys to talk to him. He's coming actually in January, so make sure to. I don't know if I revealed that, but he posted that on Facebook. So. Information. Anyways, so he was the one who very much kind of introduced me to experimental economics methodology. At the same time, I was still doing some coursework back at IES, where I took the class in development economics by Michal Bauer. So these two things somehow stuck with me for the rest of my career so far. I still keep talking, to both Michal and to Andreas. And I have to admit that these are really kind of the people who really shape kind of like where I am now. So really very much inspiring. There would be many more on the way, but kind of like these would be the two key people with whom all of that started. Okay, so I'll be talking also about some of my work, but essentially my academic career started already during the master's when I started working on a thesis that was supervised by Michal. And I was somehow interested in discrimination, so there was also one of the topics that was discussed in that famous Ökonomie des Sozialstaats course back in Constance. We talked about that with Michal. Around that time, I was also somehow interested in information economics, how people are actually processing information, whether there is, some economic rationale behind how we are processing information. And we were like thinking, okay, so can we put these two things somehow together? So out of that, there came a thesis that later turned into a full-blown paper that ended up very well. That was titled Attention Discrimination. I'll talk about that later on. Okay, so it's already kind of, this very long-term process. The paper was published later on in 2016. So it was like, we've been working on this for 7 years or 8 perhaps. Good. Then comes, so there was kind of like passing the first year, then I needed to finish the second year at IES because IES was a 2 years master's program. I managed to pass the first year generals in here, and I started at CERGE-EI, my regular coursework, the stuff that you guys know. Okay, so I finished kind of field courses, and there was DPW ahead of me. Everybody from CERGE-EI, right? Or no, or not? Okay, DPW dissertation proposal workshop. All right. So I didn't feel I was ready for that. I didn't have a topic, and I wanted to take some time off. I was talking to, my prospective supervisors. Some were supportive, some not necessarily, of me taking a half year off my PhD. Eventually I did that, and I think it was a good move. Since I wanted to do development economics, and I wanted to have a little bit more exposure to a developing country, not just kind of superficially from my travels, which I did, but actually living there, experiencing kind of this firsthand for an extended period of time. So there was this organization in the Czech Republic called People in Need. I applied for a position, it was like a volunteer position, and essentially they proposed me a job in Angola or Afghanistan. I was like, Afghanistan, no way I'm going. So I ended up in Angola for half a year. And I spent a wonderful half year in a very remote village in Angola, traveling around, essentially trying to improve a situation of kind of a training farm, but also helping with many other programs, kind of helping to build some libraries, helping to build some public infrastructure, etc., etc. So it was a really fascinating experience, and I tried looking for topics. 6 months later, I ended up without having anything, because all the ideas that I would come up with, that I would connect to the internet overnight, the data was loading, and in the morning, I would find the selection of papers that have actually addressed the topic that I found interesting on the previous day. And yeah, I returned without a topic. The organization then kind of noticed that I was interested in working with data somehow, and that I was also often talking about some evaluations of programs. So they told me, okay, we actually have a program during which you can actually do some kind of an evaluation. It is an ex-post evaluation of a project in Afghanistan. So there I go, never say never. And I went to Afghanistan to evaluate the livelihoods project that was trying to kind of improve lives of farmers, again, remote rural villages. Okay, so I go there. I was very frustrated about the process of how this evaluation works. So I told them that we need to improve on the methods, try, something like RCTs, or perhaps to try to do something like causal inference. Okay, they were kind of happy about that. We built a course together for the organization on improving evaluation methods. And there we go. Again, next evaluation comes in half a year. So I said, okay, I already know the area, so why don't I come back? And what was striking to me at the time, so I was working in exactly the same area, right? Once I was there in the spring, the next time I was there in the fall, and it looked like completely different worlds to me, okay? So in the fall, everything was kind of very lush, green, people looked kind of less desperate than I saw them kind of half a year ago, And so this started being somewhat puzzling to me. So what's going on in there? And this was actually where kind of the topic for the first chapter of my dissertation came. The topic of that chapter is called Seasonal Scarcity and Sharing Norms. And essentially what I kind of just rediscovered the wheel, I figured out that there is something like seasonal scarcity, that scarcity or poverty is not a static phenomenon, but there is actually some dynamics to it, especially in agricultural societies. So, this actually triggered kind of the interest, and, I have been kind of engaged in studying social preferences or reading many papers about that. So thinking kind of how this scarcity is affecting this social contract or social interest between people. Okay, so this is kind of how the topic came about. So it seems kind of like a very random process, but eventually, it led to the topic. Good. So this is kind of just to show you the lengthy path towards how to look for a topic or dissertation. I'm not necessarily suggesting it, but yeah, just wanted to show that there are kind of different paths to how topics could emerge in ideas. So be open. Sometimes it's really unexpected. And, there was also this kind of constant frustration through these 6 months, that I spent in Angola, seemingly wasting time, but of course, kind of getting lots of inspiration that I'm still kind of very grateful for, kind of in retrospect now. Okay. CERGE-EI, then I moved on, so I passed on the DPW, and I was working on the topic. What else should I say? Yeah, I was extremely lucky actually on the environment at CERGE-EI. So first of all, really like a great group of classmates and great super supportive faculty that was here. So I don't need to tell you, but this is really something like on which I still very much build. I don't know, so somebody may remember kind of the good old days of our office down there at the first floor, which was a very fun place to be. Good. Okay. On CERGE-EI, many great things happened to me. So first of all, I kept on working with Michael. So he was my supervisor, not only during my MA, but also kind of then further on throughout my studies at CERGE-EI. So, one thing that I was really kind of appreciating, and, today we had lunch with Michael, and he hasn't changed at all. So the great thing is really this like super honest feedback, so you come up with an idea, and you wait, and dramatic pause, and 90% of the time you would essentially get a very critical feedback, which turns out to be a very good one. So I was very happy having this kind of immediate feedback, killing ideas one after the other, and eventually converging towards something that does make sense. So, it may seem frustrating in retrospect, I wish I had somebody on all the projects that I'm working on like that. Great. What else? During my studies, mobility in New York, so one more thing that CERGE-EI is offering, right, this kind of going abroad. So I very much benefited from that. So I went to NYU for a semester in 2014, where I was sponsored by Jonathan Murdoch, who is an amazing development economist, but I also got exposed kind of to the faculty at NYU Econ and political science as well. So it was a very kind of good experience, and the only thing that I can recommend is really to do that. First of all, even if you may feel kind of, I don't know, shy or something like that, if nobody would want to talk to you, they would. You know, they wanted to talk to me. Everybody was really open. So it was a great experience. It led to a couple of presentations in there at Rutgers, at City University, at Columbia. I happened to visit Princeton because Philip turned out to be there for the time. So really, the world is small. That's kind of the message, probably. And really trying to use this as experience. And then kind of later talk also about the job market. And it turned out that some of the people I met on the way, especially Jonathan, who was hosting me, you know, ended up being a letter writer for me later on. So somebody who really supported me kind of on my way on the first job, right? Okay. Many things passed during the studies, you know, going to seminars, going to first conferences, feeling very awkward, kind of presenting for the first time, but then getting used to it. So again, I can only encourage all of you to really use these opportunities to talk to people who come here for seminars, go to conferences. Again, you start to build your network. That eventually is gonna start working also for you in terms of these people being potential co-authors. This happened to me, or being in hiring committees, you know, when you are looking for your first jobs. Good. I got exposed to some teaching experience also at all different levels. I realized I kind of like it. So there came this realization that academia might actually be something that I would want to consider. So it was definitely not something that I would have known at the beginning of my studies. You know, it somehow evolved over time. So I needed to get convinced that I really enjoy this type of a lifestyle, and it somehow worked. Okay. Good. Another great opportunity, so since I was doing field work during my PhD, I also needed some money for that. There was these opportunities to apply for the Charles University grant. I did that for GDN, the Global Development Network grant. So I applied for both. You know, again, great experience for something that you would then be doing on your academic career path anyways. Great. All right, and then, you know, years were passing and the job market was nearing, so I finally decided to actually go on the academic market. So for those of you not here, there is this centralized kind of global market for academics that used to happen actually in the US. Now it's virtual, but I was still during the live era. So yeah, in 2015 at the end, 2016 January, right? I landed in San Francisco, and I had several interviews scheduled with some universities. It worked out very well. This coincided with the birth of my son, so the timing was not great. So, you know, I can only recommend better family planning also on the way. But we made it. And I ended up in Munich. So Munich, the Alumni, is a very big university, very big economics department with core focus, or one of the core focuses on behavioral economics. So a great opportunity for a starting position. The only downside of a position in Munich was that it's not a tenure track position. So essentially it's a fixed term contract for 6 years, something very typical for the German academic system, you know, and after 6 years, you essentially have to move on. There was many great opportunities throughout. So for me, really being in this group, there is the annual CES-IFO behavioral conference. So for people who know behavioral economics, this would be kind of the conference to go to, and I could just go there on my bike. So that was pretty neat. Good. So this period, kind of the starting period, was very great in terms of offering lots of networking opportunities, lots of potential feedback, and also lots of resources. German universities are pretty rich. The top universities are even richer because they can attract external funding. And we were very lucky that at the time when I moved there, we have gotten a big grant from the German Science Foundation between Munich and Berlin, that was trying to foster cooperation between the two institutions. So there was really something amazing, which also provided lots of funds for some new research that I could start there. During that time, there was also an option to apply for mobility. So as you can see, in 2020, I took up this opportunity. I applied for funding again from the German Science Foundation to support my trip to Princeton. So that was great. I got the money. One thing that I want to highlight here is that when I went to Princeton, I reached out to Johannes Haushofer, who was there back then, so he's a development economist, who is trying to bridge the gap between economics and psychology. So he was actually working at the Department of Psychology in Princeton, and I wanted to visit him there, right? Because in behavioral economics, we are trying to absorb as much from psychology, apply economic methods to that, and essentially test many of the theories that psychologists are proposing. Why I'm talking about Johannes is somebody who I happened to meet at CERGE-EI because he was here giving a seminar talk. And we talked, then we went for a dinner with him, so I already knew him. Then Michael was organizing this conference that was called CERGE-EI. So it's a conference on lab in the field experiments in developing countries. That was happening in Prague. I helped to co-organize this conference. And Johannes was one of the keynote speakers, I guess, for the conference. So again, another opportunity to meet, right? And you keep carrying on these contacts with you throughout, and there it was very useful that I knew somebody who I could relate to in there, right? And it was literally a matter of one email asking, hey, can I come visit? Yes, sure. And there I was. So as you can see, the timing was not great. 2020. That we came in January. It's amazing, So we were supposed to stay for half a year. I took all my family with me, we packed our household, boom, COVID comes, everything shuts down. And that was it. Okay. What happened then? And I have a couple of papers actually that came out of that period. In the desperation, being stuck across the ocean, not being able to return back to Europe because we sublet our apartment in Munich and we had nowhere to return to. We were thinking with my wife how we can help, and she somehow pushed me that I should, do something with this economics that I do. And so I reached out to the think tank idea at CERGE-EI. If there is something that they think may be useful, and we started talking about something like how behavioral economics could be useful for informing the government, let's say, or local governance on how to communicate with people. Right? We know something about how to build trust in people. We know something about how people respond to uncertainty, et cetera, We know something about social preferences, how motivating cooperation between people rather than arming cooperation is super helpful in crises like that. So I wrote this advice piece on how to communicate during the pandemic. It turned out that the government did not took this kind of as they should, but they kind of like flipped the communication strategy, so they did everything kind of in the opposite way. But at the same time, we started talking with Daniel Prokop, who is a sociologist who kind of has been very active in the public debate ever since. And we started talking about, potentially collecting some data on how Czechs behave through the pandemic, and that this data could actually potentially be very useful for epidemiologic modeling, but that there could potentially also be some interesting research ideas. We teamed up also with Michal, Julia, and another colleague of mine, office mate, Jana Zahríková, so she is now in Bonn, but living in the Netherlands. This cooperation actually started and has not ended yet. And we turned out of that kind of 3 papers. So again, a very random thing. Pandemic comes, totally kills your research stay, but still there is something that one could take away from that. All right. Princeton came with one more thing that was interesting, which was that I happened to meet there in February a health economist whose name was Veronica Grembi. And Veronica Grembi, Italian name, I'm trying to use the Italian pronunciation, was actually working at the University of Milan. It was a department that I somehow knew, because there was also a couple of years back a professor, Antonio Filippin, who visited the University of Economics in Prague and gave a short course on experimental economics. And this guy was still there, so I knew that guy. And then I knew also a professor whose name was Giovanna Dada. And Giovanna Dada actually happened to be a co-author of mine, working in the areas of development economics. So again, kind of these networks, building up. And University of Milan, which should ring a bell because that's the next line kind of on in here. Okay, my fixed-term contract in Munich was running out slowly, so I needed to move on. So, I told you that my son was born kind of at the time of the job market, so he was kind of turning 6, soon to be going to school. We wanted to be somewhere where there is like some opportunity of like staying there for a longer period of time. So we started, or I started this job search in academia, and we were looking for jobs in Germany. German market has lots of offer on the junior level on these fixed-term positions, but very few openings on the senior level. I was looking for a year. There were 4 openings. And unfortunately, it did not work out well. There were some close misses, but that was it. So we extended the search to include some major cities in Western Europe. And, there was an opening at the University of Milan. There we go. And that's where I'm now. I've been there for a year, having a good life. The department is much smaller compared to the department that I was used to from back in Munich. The behavioral group is rather small, so there's Antonio, and there came another colleague, Agne, who came from Berlin at the same time as I did. So there was not so much opportunity to meet kind of this critical mass of people. But the good thing about Milan is in Milan you have actually 5 major universities. So what we decided to do was to build this group of experimentals like behavioral economists. We gather kind of every 2 weeks to every 1 month and kind of network. So, kind of again, the importance of building networks. So that's kind of to the path. where I'm now. So I think like two kind of major things. There's lots of randomness, and like one needs to be really open to unexpected events. And second is that there also needs to be some kind of like conscious vision of what you want to do, which is all of this kind of networks building, going to conferences, talking to speakers, etc. So I guess like this is what I would suggest, you know, to have some kind of a vision where you want to end up, but not being kind of derailed, you know, if things do not go the way that you thought that they should go. Shall we go to papers now? Or I don't know if you want to ask anything else. Oh, one more thing. So, you know, I've been now kind of through 4 countries, right? We take the Czech Republic. I'm Czech, by the way, so that was like easy for me, like being here. Moving to Germany, moving to the US, moving to Italy. It's hard in countries. There's plenty of this like admin stuff that one does not expect, but they happen. So bear this in mind, that it's also part of it, and like you really need to be convinced that you want to do that.
I was wondering, what about languages?
Yeah, languages, another thing. Everybody tells you, oh yeah, for the job you don't need that, which is partially true, because, you know, both in Germany as well as in Italy, lots of admin is happening in Italian or in German, right? And then the main thing, like for quality life, especially with a family, you just need to do that. So you need to invest in language, and it hurts the brain kind of. So like learning Italian now for me, yeah, I hate myself every night when I'm opening Duolingo.
On this path, is that looking back today, is there anything you would have done differently?
It's so hard to say, right? Because like there was really like so much random stuff that was happening. I don't know, like right, like perhaps like having known that I did not need to kind of, as if you wish, kind of waste my time on studying finance, perhaps. I mean, it's hard to say because, like, again, it was very useful for me, you know, to be already kind of relatively well acquainted with math and statistics kind of at the time when I was starting my PhD. So it's hard to say. I don't think one should be kind of judgmental of his or her own path. That's what it was. Yeah, I'm kind of happy because the outcome is like I'm happy with the outcome. So I should be the last one to actually complain about what I was doing. Okay. So finally, you don't need to look at my face there. Okay. So now I thought that I would show you a little bit of the work that I've been doing. So this is again from the presentation for the foundation that is helping me out. So I needed to tell them kind of what experiments are and why we do them. I guess like most of you would be able to appreciate that. But what I find fascinating about experiments is that really we are getting kind of all the way down to the respective parameters in our economic models, right? And that we can test them kind of ceteris paribus. So this is really that like it gives you this unique opportunity of kind of taking model parameters and testing them in the real life, right? By only changing something related to that one parameter, ideally, or trying to get as close to that as possible. So, you know, then we can really kind of, in that kind of large scale, so when you think of some field experiments, you know, you can be thinking kind of about how to measure precisely effectiveness of certain programs, but you can go all the way to really testing like specific economic theories. So this is something that has been very well known in the medicine, but like, you know, economics has been kind of a latecomer to that field, but now I think it's very well established. So this is a method that I just found very fascinating. It was really due to kind of the influence of Andreas and of Michal, who kind of brought to me both the methods and the interesting topics, kind of merged them all into one. All right, so there's a couple of papers that I just want to guide you through relatively quickly, so don't get scared kind of from the number of slides that I have there. And I want to spend time kind of on three kind of key things, some from my early work and some also from the work in progress. Great, and we'll have a quick ride through that in 20 minutes. So I want to talk about discrimination and how we are using economic experiments to kind of test some economic theories, but also kind of how to test whether discrimination is something that is malleable in humans, which we hope it actually is. Then I'll be talking about some more recent work on correcting biased beliefs and looking at some information campaigns that can be actually building on, you know, some theories from behavioral economics and how they can be a very cheap tool to actually help resolve some societal problems. And lastly, this is kind of a favorite, one of the favorite projects of mine that I've been working on very recently. This is kind of a project where we are trying to kind of look at a very difficult kind of social problem of mistreatment of domestic workers and how kind of behavioral economics inside can actually help alleviate this problem a little bit if kind of the typical tools of legal reforms and enforcement of labor laws are failing. Okay, so I want to start kind of from kind of why economics actually cares about discrimination, right? So discrimination can be really understood as kind of a market failure, right? Because it is costly both for the population that is discriminated against, but there are some costs to the society as a whole in terms of lost productivity, right? The standard approaches to discrimination would be that we either are just engaging in something that we call taste-based discrimination, right? Which is that we simply hate people from the other group. Alternatively, we just have some kind of beliefs about quality of some groups that are discriminated against or some minority groups, right? That may, for example, be on average of lower quality, right? And we'll be making our inference about how we are thinking of a random person from that group based on our either kind of stereotypes that can either be true or not, right? So this is so-called statistical discrimination. Good. We'll be trying to extend this. This is leading up to the master thesis of mine. But then I want to highlight also the third point, which is kind of these recent attempts of the literature trying to find ways of reducing discrimination, right? Because one thing is to establish that discrimination as such really does exist in the strict economic sense of the minority status or skin color or gender being the only attribute, you know, and here I'm getting back to the ceteris paribus, right? That it is the only reason for why a certain group is treated differently than another, right? And now these attempts are mainly relying on something that is called contact hypothesis, so exposure to minority. Right? And if you are kind of engaged in interactions, in daily interactions with a certain person from a minority group, you know, this can help you understand that it's actually a human being, and this may lead to some reduction of these biases that you may have, or some kind of exposure to role models, right? All of this is relatively costly because it requires some long-term investment. We will be thinking about whether there is also something that we can do cheaper in, you know, a potentially faster way. Good. All right. So, you know, the master thesis that I was talking about essentially ended up in this paper that is titled Attention Discrimination Theory and Field Experiments with Monitoring Information Acquisition, right? And we were wondering kind of, okay, so this statistical discrimination is essentially telling you, look, if I get access to information about individuals from, about the particular individuals who are coming from a certain group, you know, let's say they send me a CV if I'm a hiring manager, or, you know, they apply for my house that I'm renting out and they send me some information about themselves. So we're thinking that individuals should be actually processing this information for me, right? But kind of those of you who have attended like some courses by Philip Matika, for example, you know that like processing information is costly, right? So is there something that actually affects how people are how people are processing information? And could this be related to the group attribute of the person? And this is essentially what we are testing in this study, right? So what we do is a typical correspondence experiment in which we send CVs and, you know, applications for housing to real people who are offering this on the real kind of labor and rental housing markets. But what we also do on top of what other standard papers are doing in this respect, namely collecting kind of the responses, yeah, I'm invited to an interview or to a flat showing. We also want to see if we provide some information about these individuals, you know, who sign off their emails with names that we are manipulating, right, to be either of a stereotypical majority person or of a stereotypical minority person. We also want to know if the decision makers then process the information, if they read the CVs. Okay, so we introduce some tracking codes into that, and it turns out that negatively stereotyped minority names do reduce invitation rates on both of the markets, labor and rental housing. But then we have some discrepancy in terms of information provision, information acquisition, sorry. In the labor market, we see that minority names are receiving fewer views of their CVs as opposed to the rental market, okay, where it goes up. But discrimination happens in both markets. We're trying to kind of put some structure on that. And as it turned out, that what we later coined kind of attention discrimination is what best describes that. So I want to quickly show you kind of the graph that is summarizing the model in this paper. That is essentially showing that depending on the prior beliefs about the quality of an average person from either a minority or a majority group, you know, the decision makers are processing the information only if they believe that it's going to be somehow valuable for them. Right? And it turned out that there was a key difference between the labor and the rental housing market. Namely, in the labor market, there were only very few people who got selected to the interview, right? We call it the cherry picking market. As opposed to a rental housing market, do not necessarily care about how people are, if they are excellent or just good. You just want to kind of screen out the bad apples, right? So the only person that actually receives more intense screening is the one who you believe is actually going to be of the lower quality. And this is actually the pattern that we are observing later in the data, right? So it is kind of the expectation about the average person from the group that then determines whether your CV gets screened or not, okay? And essentially what we are showing is that this kind of magnifies the discrimination, beyond what the standard models would predict, you know, and then we are also proposing that, let's say, that we kind of hide the minority status from this first stage of the hiring procedure, let's say do some blind resumes, that it could actually help reduce discrimination in the long run, right? Because some of the important information about some high quality candidates from minority groups could actually be skipped by decision makers based on this type of a discrimination. All right. Okay. So now, next paper, and good. So this is a new project now, where we want to understand a bit. And here in the previous paper, right, like we were still kind of ending at the stage of invitation for an interview. And we're asking, okay, what happens when you get exposed to a person from a disliked group, you know? So let's say on the labor market, what would have happened if you hired, or if you happened to hire a person from a group that you disliked, right? Which is an answer that you will pretty much never get using these correspondence studies. So we needed to turn to something like the lab experiment that we ran online. And we are placing this in an environment of market for advice. Because what we noticed is that there is huge underrepresentation of minorities in advisory position. This paper is going to be from the US, but this is something that we observe pretty much throughout the world. Right? So these are kind of positions, financial advice, but think also of teachers who are providing advice to our children. Think of medical doctors who are providing advice in terms of our health, right? So in all of these categories, we see huge underrepresentation. And now the question is this also partially driven by discrimination? And if so, kind of how would we respond to advice that is provided by somebody, potentially from a group that we dislike. So this is what this paper is doing, and we want to actually look at both of these stages of advice seeking, which is very similar to kind of this invitation for interview or the hiring stage, but also kind of on the actual use of advice, okay? So we do this in a somewhat artificial setting of a real effort task, which is a slider puzzle that you have to solve as a decision maker. And we invite participants to actually play these games, and they can earn money for that, okay? What we do, because these games are pretty tricky to play, and they know that the more puzzles they solve, the more money they get, you know, they would benefit from actually learning about the strategy. And so what we do is that we offer them a YouTube-like tutorial that would teach them the strategy. And there's somebody who tells them in kind of a trailer video, look, I will teach you a strategy, but you'll have to pay for that, okay? And it turns out that these guys who will be showing the strategy are actually either white or black. We do this using some video post-production tricks, so it's actually the same person. And then what we do is on the first stage, we are asking kind of a willingness to pay for the advice. which gives us a fine-grained measure of discrimination on the hiring stage. But what we do is that we kind of randomly expose a fraction, a large fraction actually, of individuals to the actual advice, to the video that is revealing the strategy. And we are observing how people are then performing on the task. And what it turns out, these results, being true actually for US conservatives, we actually see somewhat lower performance today for the video. And then actually we also observe kind of lower performance in the task, which is related to the lower use of the task, right? So what you can think of is that one could actually partially rationalize discrimination for individuals who are already biased, right? So it really seems that there's a rationale for why racist people are indeed not hiring individuals because they are benefiting from cooperation or advice provision in here. Okay, these are regression tables that are showing what I just said. Let's see this page. All right. So now we talked about discrimination being there. There's various reasons for why discrimination exists. And in this paper, we'll be talking about discrimination kind of on a different domain. So far, we were mainly talking about ethnicity and race. We'll be talking about age now, but we'll also come up with some ways of using, some relatively simple behavioral interventions that will help us to reduce discrimination. Okay, so we are starting from this omnipresent kind of generational or intergenerational conflict, and starting from this kind of neat article that came out in The Economist about the young being kind of an oppressed minority. Okay, so we feel that kind of studying discrimination based on age is something that is very relevant because this is something that is heavily influencing potentially large chunks of our public spending when we think about policies related to healthcare provision, to pension, or to education. So this kind of heavily depends on intergenerational preferences. And what we want to ask essentially in this paper is whether this intergenerational conflict can also have some kind of micro foundations that really different generations are not just having different selfish preferences, but the different generations also hold kind of some animosities against people from different age groups. And we're trying to put some structure on that using some incentivized experiments. Okay, we studied this in the Czech Republic and very recently, so super fresh data from the press like last week from the US. And what we see is a very kind of systematic bias in social preferences that we elicit using allocation tasks over money against young adults relative to either your own age group or even to relatively older individuals. This effect is strongest among the oldest generation, so generation of seniors, but is very much prevalent across different demographic groups. And we can also kind of make some comparison in terms of discrimination on other dimensions. So it is, in fact, comparable to discrimination against recent immigrants to the Czech Republic. Okay. And now kind of how to reduce that kind of generational conflict. What we noticed, and here comes the COVID data set, tracking people the representative sample of Czechs over the duration of the pandemic. One thing that we were measuring was mental health. So we used some standard survey questions and measuring kind of impact of the pandemic on mental health, and we spotted kind of huge differences across different age groups in terms of mental health, seeing heaviest impact of the pandemic on the young as opposed to on the relatively old. When we asked our participants in this survey about their beliefs about the impact of the pandemic on mental health, it turned out that the beliefs were completely flipped. So people thought that it was actually the oldest who were suffering the most from mental health issues, as opposed to the youngest who they thought were actually doing quite okay. So what we did was that we simply took the facts and presented them to half of the sample. So we randomly picked, half of our subject pool that was also doing these monetary allocation tasks. And we quite naturally introduced into the same survey some information about the actual impact of the COVID pandemic on mental health by age. Okay? And what it turns out is that the simple provision of information can actually partially reduce the gap. What we are working on now, so this is coming from the US sample, we're also trying to kind of come up with other potential channels, right? Because mental health or these relative hardships that individuals are facing and the misperceptions are only able to kind of close a certain fraction of this gap. And we are trying to understand kind of what other potentially biased or mistaken stereotypes different age groups hold against one another. And this is coming in the upcoming weeks.
5 minutes, but I wanted to ask something.
Go ahead.
So basically the whole idea of the experiment is that they are paying them, giving them less money than the others?
Yes.
Do you ask them like for their explanation why they're doing that?
We do that in the US one. Okay, if you want a quick review of results, we were just discussing them today with Michelle. So, take it with a grain of salt. It turns out that kind of relative income situation is partially explaining the result, but it is not necessarily only that. There's also many other kind of stereotypes that seem to be relevant for these allocations, which is some health-related issues, but also some issues related to morality, some issues related to selfishness of different groups, etc. So it's really multidimensional why people are making the allocations that they are actually making.
You are healthy, you don't
deserve that, essentially. No, you did not suffer enough in your life yet. All right. Lots of results, but again, kind of summarizing what I just said. Good. Now, one more thing coming from this data set on COVID is related to this huge emergency. Now I'm living very close to Bergamo, so this is where it all started, So, can we actually use these misperceptions that people hold on so many dimensions? So it has been documented throughout a huge range of domains that people just have mistaken beliefs about the world and how it works. The beauty of these misperceptions is that they can be corrected by providing information. And we are trying to do this in one paper where we are trying to address the public health crisis. Namely, we'll be trying to correct misperceptions about vaccines for COVID, and namely the misperceptions that the general population holds kind of about the medical doctor community, right? Okay. So now we're asking kind of, we use information provision to be kind of a scalable and low-cost intervention that is going to help kind of increase take-up of this public good in terms of take-up of vaccines, right? So we see kind of vaccine take-up reluctance for many different diseases. We've seen that kind of for COVID. It was a major warning. So what we are doing in this is, again, we are exploiting the same data set, this COVID panel, where we have been tracking kind of willingness of our participants to take up vaccines, and actually then later also the decision to actually take it up. Okay. What happened is that very early on into the vaccination campaign, there were these heated debates in the media, essentially, where critiques and supporters of vaccines were meeting in television and radio and newspaper discussions, right? And it really seemed that it wasn't clear what the consensus among the medical community was. So what I decided to do was to contact the Czech Medical Chamber, which is the kind of overarching body. So all medical doctors in the Czech Republic need to be members of the Czech Medical Chamber, right? So the Czech Medical Chamber has actually a contact list to all doctors in the Czech Republic. And I wanted to ask the Czech Medical Chamber, what is the actual views of doctors on vaccines? So we built this very quick survey in Qualtrics, and we asked doctors, did you already take the vaccine, or are you planning to take it? It was early on, you know. Do you trust the vaccines? Would you recommend the vaccines to your healthy patients? We got 10,000 responses from out of like 40,000 doctors working in the Czech Republic, representing pretty much all groups, you know, finding overarching consensus and support for vaccines. Asking our sample of the representative sample of Czechs, the mean belief about the fraction of doctors supporting vaccines was about 60%, as opposed to 95% in reality. So huge kind of misperception about the actual support in the medical community. So what we did, very simple information experiment. Again, we provided you know, the underlying results from the survey with the doctors, and so kind of how it affects take-up. And interestingly so, the take-up, despite the fact that we provided this information in March when the vaccines were not yet available to the general public, the kind of general public was pretty much freely had free access to vaccines from about June or July of that year, right? So one provision of information in March actually had a long-term impact on the take-up. And since we had a panel, we could also see kind of which group was affected the most. And it turned out that it was actually the group that was initially not willing to take the vaccines, right? So it was not kind of just pushing those who would have done who would have done it anyways, but it was actually converting some of those just below the threshold kind of to take it up, right? So, you know, I think these misperceptions is something that should really be taken seriously, and that can bring us many potential low-hanging fruits in behavioral change. Okay. I had a couple of these graphs. That's the survey of doctors for the misperceptions, and here is the treatment effect on the vaccine take-up. I should cut it off, right? Let's cut it off. If you want to ask me some questions over, you know, the Christmas cookies, then you can ask me also about this paper. What are we doing to reduce mistreatment of migrant workers? Thanks so much.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think that the first part was more like what you can expect out of the next years that you are doing here, and what you should do during those years. And the second one was very interesting to me, and hopefully to you as well, because I didn't know what you are doing right now. Now really there is coffee. There are some Christmas cookies in the next room, so please have a bite and then start to build your network by talking to Vojta. So taking his words to action. Thank you again and have a great day.
Thanks so much. Yeah.